Move on. Accepted? Move on. We are in that dispensation. So what do we do to ensure that the people, Kenya, Tanzania, of the region of Africa, are able to find opportunities to thrive?
Allow me first to begin by thanking ICJ for this opportunity to come and make a presentation as a panelist. And also allow me, I'm here courtesy of ELGIA, which is the Electoral Law and Governance Institute for Africa. That is an organization working on the continent on matters election, electoral law reforms, and judicial support on election disputes, and constitutional law, really. So I'm grateful for this support. I'm happy that I'm here with my chair. I still call Isaac Hassan my chair, and of course Commissioner Praxidis Tororey, who's also an election expert. And I feel so privileged to have meet a judge from Malawi, whom I met during my work in Malawi last year. And you're most welcome to Kenya. Yeah, so I think the last 1.5 days have really been intense on these issues of democracy and good governance. You've done elections, and you know, what next? What did Abraham Lincoln say? Election belongs to the people. It is their decision. If they decide to turn their backs on the fire and burn, they have to do what? To sit on their blisters? That is what he said. And I think I've been interrogating that statement in terms of what happens. During elections, there are such high expectations. We know of our complex elections in Kenya. There are such high stakes because of the premium we have put on elections. And I'm sure Honorable Nyokabi here, having been in the election, the pot itself would tell us the stories of how she worked so hard to get that ticket, to get the party ticket, and then to get into parliament. So the stakes are so high, you fight so hard, and we know in Kenya we have two divides, so to say. We have two divides, and you know, by the time elections come, people are asking, is it a 2-horse race or a 3-horse race? Then with time we eliminate the small horse and we say this is a 2-horse race, and even when election results come, it is like half of the country is on one side, another half on another side. But I think even as we say that, we can take a step back and look at what happened when we got the new constitution. We also had high hopes. People expected so much that with the new constitution, we are going to rebuild institutions, strengthen them, and strengthen our democratic processes. It was not really a long-lived hope, because right now we are counting how many years post the promulgation. These are 15 years post the promulgation. But I think we still have a lot of work to do. We cannot rest on our laurels. And when I say that, I look at what is happening on the electoral space. During elections, we fight so hard, we come into office, we bring leaders into office, and then after that, our leaders tell us, Tulinunua, we bought this leadership. You can go to hell, you can see us after 5 years. You know, they accept and move on story. But remember, because of accountability, we've had to enact the Public Participation Act. The Public Participation Act is not a joke. It is pursuant to the national values and principles of governance that are well enunciated in Article 10 of our Constitution. We must have a ticket to hold our leaders to account after elections. It's not a question of come after 5 years, you meet me at the ballot. No, We must have a way in which the citizen can engage, can participate, and ask the leaders, why haven't you done this? This was your promise, this was your pledge, and you haven't done that. So we have a law, the Public Participation Act, and the courts have also pronounced themselves on this law, that it should not just be a mere exercise of a cosmetic kind of thing. It must be supported with evidence on how the public has participated in governance matters. Remember, we've come from a past where we introduced the CDF, and CDF now has become another area of struggle where the mwananchi, where the citizen is not reaping the fruits of what they have fought for. So we have had to bring in the aspect of public participation so that you can feel, yes, that vote counts, and even if it doesn't count, you can hold your leader to account for that ticket that you put in, that vote that you put in. But looking at where we are now and looking at what is happening in the region, it is very sad that whereas Abraham Lincoln had those wise words, he even also said that ballot is stronger than the bullet. But what are we seeing? I don't know whether that ballot now is making sense. Look at what happened in Tanzania the other day. A few years ago, or maybe many years ago, in 2016, I was commissioned by the African Union in a post-election mission to Uganda. The internet had been switched off. Kizza Besigye was incommunicado, and somehow one of the briefs was to go and meet Kizza Besigye in person. That time, it was not the grim story that I had yesterday. He was still in very high spirits, and he was somebody who was ready to go. Over the years, he has been kept at that space where he cannot come out and mobilize. And it is very sad that this again is coming back within the region. Commissioner Torore would tell you that when we were in the Electoral Commission, one country where we borrowed very good practices other than South Africa and, you know, other European democracies, Tanzania is one place we borrowed some of the good practices. For instance, putting a cap on the voting centers, putting a cap of voters to 700. We borrowed that from Tanzania. Placing the names of voters at the polling stations, we got that from Tanzania. And it is amazing that in 2015, I was in an election observation mission to Tanzania. And at one point, we go into a polling station and there was a delay in the delivery of ballot papers. And we found a group of people just seated there, a bit of a crowd, just seated there, and they came to us and asked, "Are you the ones who are bringing the ballot papers?" We said, "No, but what is the problem here?" "No, we've been told to wait, and we are still waiting." And we looked at each other, the Kenyans who were in that group. We said, "Will that really happen in Kenya?" I, for one, was still in the commission. I would have been lynched. "What are you doing here without ballots?" Would have been stoned almost to death if we didn't have anything. And that reminds me of one time we were doing a by-election in Mathare, and one of our polling staff kind of misplaced one of the ballot papers or something, actually the result. He had not put it inside the box. It took the intervention of the security for his safety to be secured. So I think we are looking at a situation where, yes, we have been agitating for good governance. We have been agitating for now what we call electoral justice without really looking at what are the outcomes. And I've seen in one of the questions we are being asked here is what is substantive democracy? What is democracy if you do not have results? And that is where we go. After elections, you need to see results because you have a leadership. In Kenya, we know, yes, we have a presidential system. We tried to clip the powers of a highly centralized presidential, system, but still we find that because we have representation, we choose our MPs, we have to elect our MPs, we have to elect our governors. We find that still that is not enough to even hold them to account. We have to make sure that we have people participation, we have a people-centered system. We tried to have even a new electoral system where we have brought in proportional representation. But is that enough? After elections, you've put in your people. We have questions we are still asking to date, and in your Nyokabi, I know you will go into this, where the special interest groups, Article 100, what has happened? We are not seeing women, being given opportunities right from within the parties to participate. And that permeates all across at the national level and at the county level. Yet, when you look at our constitution, Article 91, it spells out the basic requirements for political parties, the character of a political party. It should have a national character, bringing in everyone on board, ensuring women as a minority are also given the space. The youth are also crying for their space. And this is why last year, for the first time, we saw the Gen Zs taking up space on the streets also, because they've always been aloof when it comes to elections. It is the older generations who are going to vote. But now they are realizing that even that old generation, they started hearing so-and-so is in power. They started nursery school, they've gone all the way to university, and it is the same faces that are still in leadership. Yet, they are not seeing changes in leadership. So we are sort of in a crisis, we are sort of at a crossroad, and it is not interesting that Tanzania, which was a haven of peace, has now joined the fray, if I may say so. And when we look at what happened last year, the elections that happened across Africa last year, most of them, they were at a defining moment for the continent. We must change our culture. And if I may answer that question, is that we must change our political culture. We cannot continue like that, because if we do not change that political culture, then we do not expect to see any changes after elections. Because then the leaders will still take it for granted that come elections, once I spend my money in campaigns, I have to recoup my money, and the citizens must wait another 5 years, sit on their blisters, as Abraham Lincoln said, wait for the next cycle, then you can question whether you're still going to bring back the same leadership through the ballot, or then you're going to go the Tanzanian way through the street, which will not help, because Kenya tried that, and we were brought to our knees in 2007, 2008, and the best thing that happened was to re-engineer our institutions, re-engineer our judiciary, so that our leaders are accountable, the judicial system is accountable to the people and serves the needs of the people. So I think for a start, I would say that, and accountability is important even after the ballot.
We may say that the young people don't vote, but there must be a reason why they don't vote. We are being told right now that the voter registration process is open, but we are being told, and that is the problem with public trust, with US public trust, that the young people are not coming out to register as had been expected. Is it that there is a suppression? We've also seen there's very little public information being given, even by the electoral management body. around this voter registration. In previous years, we would see a lot of advertisements all over media, trying to encourage people to go vote. So at some point you have to wonder whether it's by design, that we really don't want a lot of the Gen Zs to register. But also there is the apathy, and people we have to recognize that people wonder whether elections really mean anything, and especially given what we saw in Tanzania. I saw people in Tanzania saying, not going to vote because there is no competition. It's a selection, as we say, it's one person buying again. We have only one candidate. And now we are moving, I think the sadder part also, we are moving towards this situation where they're becoming more and more bolder in entrenching autocracy. I think a couple of years ago, it used to be so shocking to see Kagame has won with 97-something%, and now it looks like it's going to be the trend in the region. So just those concerns, we're in those situations and we find ourselves wondering, how do we encourage people to continue engaging, and how do we encourage institutions, because we're also seeing a lot of institutions being gutted, independent institutions, to continue serving the people in a way that is meaningful.
And I'm humbled to be sitting amongst these distinguished speakers in the panel. We are having a conversation about democracy beyond the ballot, and allow me, as I share some lived experience, begin from the point of the ballot. So recently I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who also has a visual disability or is blind like myself. And I told him, you know what, I have now participated in an election through voting for 3 cycles now. But I cannot be certain that what or the candidates that I aimed to vote for was what actually reflected on the ballot. Because I walked in with someone, first it was a friend, another time it was a sibling, another time a partner, and told them this is the person I want to vote for. It could be a matter of trust. Maybe I don't trust them enough. But this person also told me, because I said I was uncertain, so I wasn't saying with certainty. He said, you have a point. Because sometimes, even I, when I'm in a buffet, serving a meal or a snack, and someone is assisting me, they try to put in my plate what they think I should eat, and not what I actually asked for. And while we were having that conversation, we had some beverage, some fluid in the glass, and someone kept refilling our glasses before they got empty. So when we walked to that, from that venue, we thought we'd only had one glass of whatever it was. But it was one glass that had been refilled several times. Our tongues were heavy. We don't walk straight most of the time, but that time it was more crooked. But anyway, why do I bring this conversation? It's because sometimes as we discuss democracy or other conversations that we may have, it is easy to forget that there are some individuals or group of people whose aspirations are often not reflected. So that is from our perspective, or from my perspective as a person who's blind. There's someone who has a physical disability who might not even be able to access that polling station. There's someone who has a psychosocial disability who even the legal frameworks, including our constitutions, disqualify them from participating whether as a voter or as a candidate because of their perceived inability by the society, which is now institutionalized. Then in that context, I ask myself the question, what does substantive democracy mean beyond the ballot? So one of the other ways, there are many, in which citizens feel represented is by having people who understand your interest, your experiences, and your aspirations in the various frameworks that exist, right? And for us to make sure that that is the position, or to apply that, we also need to take very deliberate steps or take measures to include those who have previously been excluded, also have their voice heard. It needs some legal measures, it needs some institutional measures, and as Kenya, and we need to applaud this, we have taken some steps which are actually envied by other jurisdictions. We have a constitution that in its national values and frameworks, alongside other provisions, recognizes the values of equality, non-discrimination of all people, including persons with disabilities and other marginalized groups. And with respect to elections and democracy, we have a framework or specific provisions which were very much celebrated by the movement. And in this case, I speak of the movement that I'm part of, persons with disabilities. I have way more experience of being a person with disability than a legal expert, right? So allow me to focus on that more. We did celebrate that we had specific provisions that recognized these aspirations. In the levels of governance which are very close to us, and we are in touch with, in the counties' assemblies, for instance, the Constitution required that special interest groups, and uses the terms including persons with disabilities, should form part of the assembly, whether by election or by nomination. And where we do not have sufficient representation by election, then political parties should also propose members who could will be nominated to represent these groups. In 2013, 4 counties did not nominate or did not have persons with disabilities who were nominated in their county assemblies. We said maybe they had a wrong understanding of the law, or maybe they ignored it. We have to work hard to ensure that in 2017, this position changes. What happened in 2017? We had 17 counties which did not have a person with disability nominated in the county assembly. And in 2022, we had 21 counties. It begs the question, is it that we are now walking back from the promises that we give to specific individuals or to specific groupings? And then we realized, after various interpretations, including by the courts, that these provisions actually say including persons with disabilities. They do not say in very specific express terms that this party list should include or should have persons with disabilities including on the priority list, right? And therefore the electoral body will use that which has been submitted to it by the political parties, right? So it becomes a matter of argument, right? It then takes us to the next level, or takes me to the next level, or the next question that I asked myself as I was reflecting on this panel. Then what role should we play, or do we have as jurists or as various institutions that we represent? Inclusion begins at home. At home for us, it is the society from which we live in, including the societies, the institutions which we work for or we lead, and then the institutions which have a mandate to fulfill the aspirations as provided for on the Constitution of Kenya and other legislation. So if in our own institutions we do not consider the voices of persons with disabilities and other marginalized groups, we should ask ourselves, for instance, in our bar associations like the Law Society of Kenya, do we have representation of persons with disabilities in the council? Someone else may ask, but we did not have an aspirant vice. And later, as I conclude this conversation, I will give an example, or perhaps an explanation, attempt to explain why that is the position. We need to start from there, even as we push for inclusion in the other levels. The other levels include political parties, the electoral management bodies, the registrar of parties, etc., etc. But again, it is we who sit in those panels. It is we who help in designing these policies, which then inform practice. As we do that, do we design the policies in a manner that they do not exclude specific categories of citizens or individuals in our countries? And we cannot do that if we are not in touch with these individuals. So we cannot go asking every person, actually we should, but we cannot go looking for every person. You're from a marginalized group, you're a person with disability, what would you want us to include? But we have groupings which are created to represent the aspirations of these individuals. We have organizations of persons with disabilities which are entrusted with these mandates by the persons with disabilities themselves. And the same case applies to women, to the youth, and other groups which have been left behind before. So we need to reflect upon ourselves. And it's a question that has come up from the beginning of the conversation yesterday. What are we also doing to ensure that even at the very high level, if these individuals are not included, that we are including all persons, regardless of their backgrounds, in the levels which we work in.
Thank you so much. I'm also really delighted to be here and to be with the ICJ group. In fact, one of my own shocks when I went into Parliament was the thinking that this is how parliamentarians spend their time, thinking about all problems. I don't know this is how Parliament is. They no, what brings us here is our problems. The people's problems are your problems. I was in the House Business Committee, and I thought, no, where is the agenda for the House, the people's rights? And I remember, who are we talking about? Who brought this one here? So now, really happy to come back to where we can have good discussions and interactions and continuously move our society forward. And so for the ACJ, thank you for the AJC and also the sessions. So when I got the question, I'm also happy to be on this panel on the substantive versus procedural democracy. And truly, we have to get into procedural democracy as well. Our elections have cleaned up with time. In fact, in my view now, the only election we are yet to really get right is the presidential election. By and large, the ward elections, the constituency, the gubernatorial, and we still have a bit of work in the sense of the quality of the leaders. But in terms of the counting the ballots and all that, that's working well. So, and I'm also reminded of Waika's question as to what happens to people like us who go into Parliament. What happens? Why are we not able to do the right thing? And partly it's just critical mass. The House is full of wrong people. 70% bad people, 30% good people. So we have to upset that. We have to send 50% good people so that the society can move. And even when I was going into elections myself, I thought if people like Sonko can crack these elections, why can't do this? If Sonko is cracking, what is wrong? What are they doing this prosecution? Why are we reading it? And that we are supposed to crack these elections, but when Tito, Sonko, all those guys can crack and get elected. And so it's going to be critical mass, but also this part of the procedural democracy, our arrest of the democracy is at the political party. Because remember, we elect at the IBC level, and I'm happy chairman is here, at the IBC level, which is our best election. So we now need to find how we cut out the party primaries, because that's where we have a problem. But at IBC level, which is what we've spent a lot of time cleaning up, we then have candidates who have been processed by parties. And parties have processed their own candidates. Parties are continuously taking away seats that belong to persons with disability shamelessly. We now have something we are calling invisible disability. I think financial or sexual or another disability. So now it must be that we get into the party primary level. We have to get into that party primary. It is dirty, it is murky, it has problems, but luckily it follows the law. We are following the PPTD, the Political Parties Disputes Tribunal. We are following the political parties. And thank God with our Constitution of Kenya 2010, Article 90 and 91, now political parties are constitutional bodies as well. In fact, political parties are now legal bodies. We must treat them as such. We must fight these political parties until we clean them up, because there is not going to be any other way. Otherwise, now by the time we arrested democracy, in fact for me I said we don't have procedural democracy. What we have in Kenya is arrested democracy. The democracy has been arrested. I also always knew about the party being a problem. We have a whole lot of people we call democracy brokers. Those are the worst. In fact, party leaders are bad, but in my view, party leaders are the list of the bad guys. We've got a forest here of democracy brokers. Typical democracy brokers, they've been around and they move from one party, to this coalition, and to that coalition. One other thing for us is the weakness in coalition laws, because we have serious problems with political parties. But now, at coalition level, we don't have sufficient law, because I don't even think the Constitution foresaw the very need for proper coalitions, both pre and post-election. And we have to now legislate and constitutionalize coalitions because of the 50% plus one. So we have problems at political party level, which is what the problem is for women, youth and special interest groups to get into elections. But now at coalition level, it gets even worse. In fact, even for me, Nyokabi usilete hiyo mambo ya agenda hapa. Hapa hatuna agenda kwa coalition. At your party level, you can wrestle your party leader on these gender requirements. At coalition level, that's not why you're in this room. Gender, PWD, is what that was. Now, we are now at power level. So my own view was we have to get to political parties, and we have to constitutionalize coalition, and we have to clean them up, the code of conduct, vetting of candidates ahead of the election. We have to find a way of putting that in law, the NCIC vetting, the ESCC vetting, the IEBC vetting, and it must be serious vetting, because we still take the clearances, the documents that we have to take for clearances. But then I turned on to the substantive democracy. So having the challenges we do with procedural democracy, we then now have substantive democracy. And part of the substantive democracy's failure is failure to address poverty and economic goods. So now we have political rights. We are participating in elections. I think 14 million participated in the last election. But then there is nothing to show for it. There is no water, there is no electricity, there is no food, there is no road. Nothing of that comes through, and the people are getting frustrated. And then the populists have learned how to use that language, get elected without any serious meaning at delivering healthcare and education and all of those things. So I turned into that question and wondered about jurists and having worked in programs in ICJ. My first answer is the budget process, is the budget cycle. Immediately after the election, part of our substantive democracy must now be someone who has been elected, Waitito has been elected, whoever has been elected. How do we engage in the budget process, which is now our Constitutional Chapter 12, and just make sure that the Article 43 rights are then being budgeted for. In our, part of the reason we don't have healthcare is because we've never surpassed 5, 6, 7% of the budget on healthcare. I think that we are now probably below 5% of budgeting on healthcare. So it's not possible to have healthcare when the budget doesn't even provide for it. And the Abuja Declaration, again, we are people of international standards. Abuja Declaration at 15% health, 10% Ouagadougou Declaration on agriculture. So get into that budget cycle and push it effectively. For the judiciary, both Parliamentary Service Commission and Judicial Service Commission are sui generis commissions to guarantee independence of those institutions. Parliament, for their own reasons, has gotten a bit more resources for the work that they do. My own answer would then be, because judicially we're not going to have the same political muscle, is to always say, whatever the budget of Parliament, equalize for the judiciary. Whatever the budget of Parliament, equalize for the judiciary, because they are two organs that are supposed to have the same protection within the budget process. So the judiciary budget is still a big challenge for us. The constitutional commissions and independent offices, and that is why the jurists have to come in. The constitutional commissions and independent offices are not going to have budget unless other people are speaking for them, unless other actors, strong actors, and the civil society is feared. In fact, I was telling Michael the story that in politics, people fear the civil society so much. If they just knew the jurists are only a room of 60 people. When the politicians talk about civil society people, you can think like a whole army. So because the civil society are here, when we discuss, the CDF is discussed in a whisper, that those CDF people will find us. those civil society will find us. The way, one time actually the president almost got the 15% law, the 15% for funding NGOs. And then it was becoming really problematic because of the World Vision and AMREF and the Northeastern and all these people who are in HIV, antiretroviral. So can you be specific on who exactly is in the 15%? You won't believe it. It was just the human rights people. It was Gladwell, Kegoro, it is, I think the book here in his room, it is OSI. Those are the ones who are targeted by the 15% rule. And so it is possible for us to really get into these spaces because already they fear the civil society, already Parliament, by the way, the public participation is not an act yet, it is a bill. So the public participation bill is going to be a good one. And you know the sad thing with public participation bill, it used to be a bit like the access to information. When it was access to information was being discussed in secrecy. The law of openness is itself discussed in secret. So even the public participation bill, because the judges have set very, very high standards that Parliament has to comply with on public participation, and thank you to our judges, they have made public participation a fatal omission. It doesn't matter if it is the finance bill, it doesn't matter if it is the whatever law, if you have public participation, fatal omission. I have learned that about our judiciary because now public participation ordinarily would not have gained traction, but now it has to gain traction because of the judiciary. And so getting into those public participation spaces and using that for the budget and the constitutional commissions. Article 43, right? And then devolution as well. But I put in something new for ourselves that I want us to discuss. Because our traditional donors, even say like when the Trump changed the USAID and the HIV retrovirus came up, he said it is up to your governments to fund those issues. So even we here, worried about civic education, worried about following rights, worried about all these abductions, I think it is time for NGOs to get public funding. It is time for that conversation in Kenya as well. If we're going to have, because in the budget we are funding all the important things for the country. Yeah, I think it is important enough for NGOs. And it did come up when the Media Council of Kenya, and I love that Kenya Udi was here, he was our first chair of the Media Council. So originally, the Media Council thought that we are so independent, we shouldn't get public funding. And so that is how the Media Council started. And then soon as the law was passed, the Media Council couldn't stand because you needed public funding to support the work of the Media Council. And so the decision was then made for the Media Council to apply for public funding. So I think the same for NGOs, and many countries now have public funding for NGOs. So just the same way we are in the budget for competition of resources, is also the same way the NGOs would then get in there. So legal laws, the Article 100 law has been pending also for a long time. The civil society got the advisory from the Chief Justice Maraga about the dissolution of Parliament. We need another similar advisory for the two-thirds rule to work, and Happy Waiko is here with Katiba Institute. Actually, part of the reason why women got tickets in the last election is because of the two-thirds gender rule requiring the IBC not to accept the list of parties unless it has two-thirds compliance, which is 34%. Eventually, the UDA did go to court and stop it, but by that time, many of us had actually already gotten the tickets. So now, that Article 100 law becomes still very important. And I like something that we are saying here about prescriptive laws. At ICJ, we have also largely believed that the society is good, not anymore. Our laws must now be 2 times 3. Bang in the morning, bang in the afternoon, bang in the evening. That's the only way we are going to be able to chase the level of corruption that we have in our systems. So that if it's the two-thirds law, it's going to be two-thirds for the 290 constituencies, two-thirds for the 47 governors, two-thirds for the Senate, and this Article 100 law is important and needs to also be done, but supported also by PIL and public interest litigation. But let me end on the story that the work that NGOs are doing and CSOs is so important. If we didn't have this work, I even worry whether we would have a country at all. Because once power is in play, then the power doesn't quite see what the people see. So it is up to us to continuously do what we are doing without getting tired, without blinking, and increasingly worry about critical mass. That there must be more of us doing what we're doing. There must be more of us in those spaces. There must be more of us challenging the status quo. And also admitting that if some of us, and if some people from civil society are not in those rooms, it will get a lot worse. So we better just protect even the worst that we could get into. But we have a lot of work to do. Even in the coming election, the 2027 election, we have a lot of work as jurists and a lot of laws that we need to follow, a lot of litigation that we need to do, a lot of civic education, and taking the ball back to where it matters. And for me, what matters most is resources. So we have to go into the resource conversation, including resources for NGOs.
So thank you for that. I'll move to Luciana. Please address the fourth and fifth questions on how we can use technology better and how we can use civic education to try and build civic movements.
But allow me to speak to two things that I came from Wilson's presentation, but also from Commissioner Mahiri's presentation. The first being the question of the political culture. Why are we not making traction towards substantive democracy? I think there's an apparent tension that we see between the Constitution and the culture that underlies the Constitution that is always going to be present when we have this conversation. So let me take the example of political parties because she mentioned it and Wilson also mentioned inclusion. So Article 91 has a very nice requirement of what political parties should be, including the microcosm for good governance, inclusion, and accountability. And so the Constitution requires that political parties be the ones that facilitate inclusion by women, people with disabilities, and youth. But at the same time, the way in which political parties are structured, and I know Commissioner Nyokabi will speak better to this question, political parties look to members to provide them with the resources to do their activities. So on one hand, the law is requiring political parties to organize their affairs to facilitate people to take part in the political party activities, but political parties are wondering, when you come to us, what do you bring to the table? Are you going to contribute to the national campaign? Are you going to contribute to going around the country and publish in the affairs of the political party? So there's an inherent tension between what the Constitution requires and what is the actual culture that underlies political parties. And secondly, which is the approach that, and she's already alluded to this, is the charity model that political parties and implementers take when it comes to inclusion. It's this idea that we're just helping you manage. You're not entitled to it, but let's just help you manage. And so even when the law requires inclusion, people see it as a nice thing to do rather than an imperative. And that dictates also the efforts that are given towards inclusion. So when you speak towards disability and differing versions of disability, because I've done a study on this across counties, one of the things I have found interesting is how different counties define disability. So I'll give one example. When we went to the Narok County Assembly, because less than 0.5% of the county assemblies have people with disabilities, when we asked to see who are the people representing disabilities, we were told it was women who had undergone FGM who are considered to be disabled. Now, if you read Article 260 of the Constitution, there is no such definition of disability, but that's the definition that Narok has adopted as disability, right? And so you have people defining for themselves what it should mean and then complying the way they would like. If you look at counties like Isiolo County, when it comes to including minorities, if you look at the County Assembly of Isiolo, one of the people who was nominated to represent minorities is a gentleman known as Budia Waruguru. Budia Waruguru had contested the elections in Kirinyaga, I think, and then he failed to get nominated, and then he was nominated to the County Assembly of Isiolo to represent minorities. Now, in what frame of imagination is he a minority? Do you understand? So this tension, this political culture where we have the way we do things and then there's the way the law says that we do things, those things will always be in tension. Now, one of the frustrations that I've had with ensuring compliance with these rules is even the way the laws are crafted. So if you look at the party list process and how we develop party lists, Section 36 of the Elections Act says political parties will present their list, then IBC will vet, and if they're not compliant, they will return the list. Now, the law mandates the IBC to only review the list once, and political parties know this. So political parties will bring an uncompliant list, knowing IBC will mandate them to repeat the process. Then when they repeat the process, who do they put? The people they actually wanted. So if you look at I've seen this in Kakamega, I saw the party list for Jubilee Kakamega 2017. Political parties understand that the thing that IBC wants to see is zebra listing, man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. So we can put the correct name and put the wrong gender, IBC will notice. Case in point, let me go back to Budia. If you look at at the Isiolo County Assembly list from 2022. Next to Buja's name, his gender is listed as female. Is Buja female? No. Did he get nominated? Yes. So, political parties have understood how to game the system, and they game the system. So, on paper, it looks as if political parties are complying, but in actuality, they are not. Unfortunately, even the way our dispute resolution mechanism is structured, there is very little room to change those things later in time, and so people who are non-compliant end up being nominated to serve. But let me also speak to the question of descriptive representation and why I am grateful that despite these shortcomings, we also have bright lights in this space, and I think they're changing our perception around what representation should look like. So one of the reasons why I believe this charity model has undergirded how we allow representation is people think people with disabilities are let's just be helping. But when you have people with disabilities, when you have women who are doing well, it changes the narrative. Who here doubts that Senator Crystal Lasige makes substantive contributions to debate on the floor of the House? Have we not shifted the way we look at people with disabilities? Even more importantly, have we gotten us to think about the intersections of exclusion? Because this is something that we rarely think about. Many of us think about exclusion as silos. There's women, there's youth, there's people with disabilities. But the majority of excluded people experience these forms of exclusion simultaneously. So to go back to the example of Senator Asige, she's both a woman and a person with a disability, right? So even as we make policies and as we require political parties to comply, let's also think about the lived experience of exclusion is not linear. And that's part of why when we do policies, when we do decision making, when we craft laws, we should not craft laws as if these experiences are linear, they are intersecting. And if we don't have people who have this lived experience in the lawmaking arena, then those laws will continue to exclude these categories of people. That's part of why I believe the experience of substantive democracy is not working, at least for these groups of people. Let me come back to the question of technology, which is what I've been asked to address. One of the things which technology has done for us is it has leveled the playing field substantively, especially where political campaigns are concerned. Previously, you had to have a lot of money, have boots on the ground, have people spreading your message across. But with technology, people who didn't have those kinds of reserves are now able to share their messages using multiple platforms. So WhatsApp has become a very active mobilizing tool, Facebook, and the like. What that means then is more people who are excluded are now able to join the fray. But the flip side is that you also have introduction of disinformation, misinformation, and in many spaces, these are also gendered. So what we have seen during election campaigns and even after is creation of narratives that force women, particularly, and people with disabilities to step back because technology has been used to create deepfakes and to create disinformation that portrays them in a very negative light in the public space. So technology is going to be a huge enabler going forward, but there are also risks that we must continuously think about in terms of how do we protect people from the impact of malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, deepfakes, and the like. But secondly, how do we also harness these technologies to make electoral processes easier? There are ways in which we can plan better because of access to technology allowing us to map, allowing us to plan about voter registration, allowing us to deliver material that is sufficient and avoid the hiccups that we saw in 2022 where some areas didn't get ballot material altogether. So there's opportunities that we can harvest, particularly because of the demographic that we are working with, but there's also concerns that we must address, and unfortunately our law is still catching up on malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, and in the context of the elections, unfortunately, information that is false, the virality with which this information is spread is such that even if we do fact checking, even if we take down this information later, the impact has already been seen. We've had countries where misinformation has been spread about change of polling venues. You wake up and you see information that says the polling station which was here has been moved to a different locality, getting people to be suppressed from voting. And so we must always be conscious about, whereas we're increasing access, how else can these tools be used to discourage people from participating. Lastly, there was a point that was made by Stella about whether young people are apathetic and whether they take part in these processes, and whether there is actually room There's actually room for political participation by the youth. I will venture to say the young people are not apathetic. Young people have demonstrated, particularly through online activism, but also through the protests. The problem is not whether they are engaged. The problem is whether their engagement leads them to spaces where their voices are being heard. Traditional political parties have ignored young people. Young people are pawns during elections, then we ignore them after elections. How many cabinet secretaries do we have who are young people? Youth. How many PSs do we have who are youth? So we use them to get us to the place where we get seats, then we cast them aside after elections because we assume their utility is done away with. So we must ask, with the forms in which the digital age has introduced activism, which is different from traditional forms, political party activity, what are the opportunities that exist now for innovation and adaptation of the way in which we allow young people to take part in political processes? The data is showing young people don't want to join political parties, they don't believe in them. So how do we tap into the spaces where they are operating so that we shift from anger to actually influencing policy decisions? Thank you.
On prolonged absence beyond the ballot by members of parliament. We have a case in mind where the Constitution does allow that one can be absent with the Speaker's permission for at least 8 sittings or more with extended permission from the Speaker of Parliament. But we have situations where members of Parliament do not even step in Parliament. A case in mind is the MP for Kapseret constituency, and he has no apologies for not being in Parliament. And then there is the second case of an MP who may be suffering from illness and will be absent for more than the 8 sittings allowable by the Constitution. Again, here is where the discretion of the Speaker might be put to question, because what then happens to the constituencies that the MP represents? A case in mind, there's an MP who's been away for over 2 years, and if the Speaker continues extending that leave of absence, then it will be a complete 5 years. And is this a situation where perhaps the courts can interfere or step in? Then the question arises of separation of powers, and can the courts interfere with the internal processes of Parliament? That is an issue. But in certain other jurisdictions, you'll find that, like in the UK, if an MP has been absent for that length of time, they will resign, unless there are certain provisions that are put in place such that it cannot be an indefinite absence by a member of Parliament. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
We talk a lot about how politicians have made elections expensive, which means that it's very difficult for non-moneyed people to participate and all have a chance to be elected. But what we don't talk about, and what bothers me even more, is how IEBC has made the actual elections so expensive. I think we are looking at a 70 billion, if not more, for the 2027 elections. I think we spent about 60 billion for the 2022 elections. We are supposed to, we've been told by the President that we'll be building a highway from Nairobi to Mau Summit, and then from Rimuru to Maimahi for 160 billion. So 70 billion is a lot of money. What should we do about that? What do we need to do to make our elections less expensive? And just a quick comment and an acknowledgement. You know, when we talk about Article 100 and the 2/3, one thing that's a lot of us miss out is the effort by the first commission, Isaac Hassan's commission. The efforts they put to try and implement the 2/3, including coming up with constitutional formulas. because we always think about amending the Constitution, which is not what the Constitution said. And I really invite people to go and look at the effort that first commission put, which was coming up, I think, Honorable Hassan, about 3 formulas where there was very solid legal opinion that they were actually constitutional. But because those meant that in some way they set aside seats for women, what we were asked, some of us who participated in those processes, in participation of those processes, what do you mean Kibera can be a woman constituency, or Gatundu South? That time was Gatundu South being associated with Kenyatta, although he didn't need it, or Kibera with Raila Odinga. So sometimes let's not look for shortcuts, because we have been looking for shortcuts and we haven't solved it, yet we had a formula. Thank you.
So on questions of inclusion, for instance, and the required party lists, etc., the gaps, we saw in the first round, and that's what we was talking about, the first IEBC and so on, there was a lot of strategic impact litigation, there was a lot of follow through on policy, regulations, guidelines. We seem to kind of have released our foot on the pedal a little, or perhaps it's something happening. I think it's being preemptive to see where the opportunities are to rectify those. Do we go to court? Should persons with disabilities go to court? That statistic is very concerning, yet the Constitution has provided for it. It goes back to the 2/3 gender principle, going all the way to the Supreme Court. There's a pronouncement, and then we are defeated. Now we are waiting to see where the chips will fall, right? So it's a question, where do we place the accountability in terms of addressing what the electoral process ought to look like so that it can yield substantive democracy in the aftermath? In the same vein, a very, very concerning trend of the linkage between political violence and the absence of free and fair elections. It's very clear, like day and night now, that we will have elections and then people will die and then we will shake hands and we will leave them in the courtrooms for decades. It's deeply concerning. And I think as jurists, I was asking myself yesterday, if we want to prioritize, there's so much for us to do. We've talked about many strategies since yesterday. If one asked me, I would say hold some people accountable. And that accountability cuts across the board. It's from IEBC, where are the loopholes? So we finish our constitutional petitions. We were told how quorum is for, it is not the chairperson, it is this, it is the other. There were many beautiful jurisprudential things there. And then after, we wait, we fight again, we add the list. We leave victims hanging, we shake hands, and we move on. These are not isolated issues. Our right to free and fair elections and substantive democracy has now been directly related to our right to survival. And unless we begin to pursue some form of accountability, I think every electoral cycle is going to produce bloodshed in this country. Finally, the regional trends. You've all talked about it. The latest, the newest kid on the block, Mama Suluhu. Sorry, Mama? Mama Sulu, yes. Why is it possible? And I know LGR, that's why I'm asking, there's some opportunities somewhere that we are not harnessing. The same things are happening. They're reading from the same script. We were talking about the authoritarian playbook yesterday. There's an electoral playbook. January to be M7. We've already seen our own Bob Jagi and Nick are caught up So it starts simply. Where are the opportunities for regional synergy to begin to address this in a more impactful way? And I think if we can tap into some of those, we continue to build incrementally towards the change that we wish to see. Thank you.
These are quite difficult questions, and I've been looking at my chairman and wondering if he wants to say something, because he appeared in court many times defending a lot of IEBC actions, and I would like to hear your voice on these things, Chairman, and on the issues of elections being expensive. Right now, the Ethicon team is looking at having to compile a new voters register. Remember, Chebukati was riding on the register, largely on the register you created with your team. So it would be nice to hear your voice, and then I can address and I'm really grateful that Waikwa and the other Kenyans like you who took note of the efforts by the Isaac Hassan team, and we shall speak on that, time allowing. Chairman, kindly.
I wrote a book, 560 pages. After 5 years of labor of love, I put it to book. Even the judge read it and he told me he really enjoyed the book. But elections are very emotive. They are very controversial. For example, my sister, Priscilla Nyokap, she made a statement that I violently disagree with. She's violently disagree with. She says all elections are very good, except the one for president. She made that statement. And we just let it go like that. The same, we conduct elections one day for 6 ballots. For president, for governor, MCA, women rep, senator, and MP. It is done by the same officials. The presiding officer is the same, the deputy, the clerks, the polling clerks, they use the same infrastructure. You can't tell me that the other 5 elections are all free and fair, but this one for president is only work. You can't tell me that. And I have said as much in my book, because I think I mentioned in the yesterday, because of our system of government. Access to power is access to resources, about employment, about ability, and therefore there is no incentive to concede. And this, our company, maybe as we talk about substantive democracy, we should also talk, we cannot ignore the results of the election. The results, the consequences that if we keep on using this winner takes all model, we will keep on having orphans. If you say this, we'll keep on having orphans. So let's go back to and tell ourselves the truth. We have to modify our democracy. That's what I argue in my book that, and I spoke about yesterday. The concept of consocialism, we can't ignore it. Even Samia Suluhu, if she's smart enough, will have to go through that route eventually, because we can't control policing or governing by coercion. Only has a limit. Ultimately, you can't sustain it. So, but coming back to the cost of election. Yes, our ballot paper is very expensive. It's even more expensive than the money we print in Kenya. It has got 12 security features. I don't know if I've increased, but during my time, there were 12. Some of them you have to use this light, UV light, to know it's fake. But why do that? That is the cost of mistrust and distrust among ourselves. We are expecting machines, technology, security feature of ballot paper to cure a very deep problem of mistrust. You don't trust institutions, we don't trust ourselves, we don't trust our political party leaders. If the executive director of a political party can submit a nominated list for nomination and include a man as a woman, surely, I mean, how is it going to work? So I have no particular solution. I think the cost of the election has a lot to do with our own society.
How are you going to do it during campaigns? When have we have the law, but we have the regulations, the campaign finance regulations. Those are now questions for all of us, because really we are looking at ourselves, our society. This is who we are, okay? And that is how we do things. So that cost we are bearing is because of who we are. We cannot trust each other when it comes to elections. And allow me to go to the next issue, still from Waikwa, that you know, and you've recognized the efforts that were done by the Isaac Hassan team. We appreciate. When we talk about inclusion, allow me to go back to even issues Wilson had mentioned. There is a big gap when it comes to civic education and by extension, voter education. There are roles for the IEBC and there are roles for the political parties. In the run-up to 2022 elections, I was called upon by the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties to carry out some training and sensitization for women and for youth. And while in a session with the youth during a break, I saw a young man come to me and ask me, why can't IEBC help him get on the party list? He doesn't know, and at that point I asked him, what's your name? And he gives me a lady's name, and at that point I knew really I had to be very sensitive how I was going to handle him, her. Yes, it was that bad. So I had again to do some voter education on the roles of IEBC and the roles for political parties. We've talked about Article 91. Parties have refused to unpack that. They do things in their own style, and you can see even when it comes to dispute resolution. IEBC is saddled with a lot of disputes, whereas they could be handling other things, all because parties do not want to follow their own internal dispute resolution mechanisms. And that is why the internal structures are there. They have to be tested, they have to work before you go to IEBC, before you go to PPDT, and finally the appeal process in the High Court. So that bit on voter education has gone, it is not with Mwananchi, it is not with the youth, it is not with women. Some don't even know that we have not yet even started drawing out Article 100, talking about it. I'll tell you, I belong to a small group. It is called the Ethnic Minorities and Marginalized Communities of Kenya. I don't know if you have heard of it. And there is a department in the executive office of the president that handles ethnic minority issues. People don't know about it. We are now doing a policy on that. And I hope that will, you know, in a way, raise some awareness to the electorates about rights of minorities and marginalized. So we have a gap in all this, including the issue of the 2/3 gender rule, which we've already spoken to. And yes, there's a lot to be done, and the conversation needs to continue in earnest.
Be very quick as well, especially on the Praxidis question, and it is indeed true. I think eventually Parliament interpreted it to be 8 consecutive, but then I think day 1 is now, and then day 2 is, you know, after 1 month, then day 3 is after another month. So because the Speaker has a lot of discretion, so it is true. It actually appears that it is court that can have an intervention. But another thing that we have needed a lot for the representative democracy is because when we didn't have IBC, there are also many constituencies that lived without members of parliament until we have the by-elections now in November. So yes, the court can help. But for IBC here, judiciary created the Ombudsman's office, and judiciary has made a lot of good steps in terms of strengthening the arm on its delivery. Parliament does not have a parliamentary ombudsman. We don't even have a code of ethics for parliamentarians and parliamentary staff. And the same standards, because we were saying that they need the same budget, it means that the same standards that the judiciary has, including on performance, are also the standards that Parliament should be put to. And because these institutions will not reform themselves, they have to be reformed from outside. The inside is too resistant. They have to be reformed from outside. So now we need to start, championing for a parliamentary ombudsman and even a parliamentary code of ethics that then would require the member to, in good faith, resign because they are in bad health. The other thing is also because of the ruling party problem and the ruling party coalition, a member like that is now difficult to deal with. Even if eventually the court order does come, the court order will come and then the speaker will still decide what to do. So we have a bit of work in the sense of the systems and the procedures and replicating the performance system that the judiciary has for parliamentarians as well. And I like the question of course of election, and it's true, Chairman, that it is 6 ballots on the same day, and really long conversations around even the cost. Remember in JLAC, we had that conversation on the cost of the election. But one of the things I have loved about having people who, for example, are from ICJ background, you remember that now the JLAC conversation gets easier. We can all, these regulations, this kind of work that we are all doing can get a little bit of space. But our elections are expensive for many, many reasons, including just the cost of technology, which eventually fails. That's even the part I don't understand. We pay so much for it, and then eventually it doesn't work. Although to be fair, the BVR now works. It is the AVID, it is the transmission of results that we're still working on. But the one that is worrying me most on that question of WICWA is the Election Campaign Financing Act and regulations. Again, Parliament is very resistant. It was resistant on the law, but eventually the law passed. Now the resistance is on the regulations, because it is not going to be possible for us to go into elections where votes are for sale. So Wanjiko is the problem in the sense that the voters also now have given up on the democracy goods. They now say, give us what you're giving us today. Because they're never going to have water, they're never going to have electricity, they're never going to have, they don't even believe that those things can come. What do you have now? Give me now so that we are done with the election. So we do urgently need. In fact, I'm hoping that ICJ from this conversation, we start our 2027 programming right away, because we need some legal reforms. Some laws are pending and very critical laws. The Article 100 law, this law on PWDs. If we have prescriptive regulations on who is a PWD, including criminal sanctions for anybody who calls themselves a disability when they are not a disability, we could reduce the bad habit and the 21 counties that now don't have PWDs. The formula, Article 177, is still the accepted formula, the top up. I think that if we have the 2/3 formula also passed now, that would also help, and then the budgetary processes we spoke about and the PLL. But the one that is there would mean that we have better elections and better outcomes in 2027, because it is indeed true, the violence threat is real. So again, mapping, early warning systems, I think 33 of our boundaries are actually problematic boundaries by the NCIC. So starting all that work in good time, again, NCIC is going to come up for recruitment of new people. So you are right on the prioritization and even regional lessons and regional learning. But then maybe a whole electoral program, maybe a whole elections program, even with the LGR and all that, maybe another program on special interest groups. We actually do need ICJ on it, because I don't see any other organizations that can help. LSK is now also, the abductions are also still going on, so we need somebody else to now focus on the electoral preparations, even if it is a group of NGOs, the electoral observers, the domestic observers. Part of what also has been bad for us is because now, and I like Chidi's earlier lesson, the politicians move very fast. The politicians have finished the election of 2027 as we speak now. They have finished. They have agreed on the coalition, they have agreed on the candidates, they have agreed the special interest groups, as you see clearly, other than Mother Karua, who was here, not on those tables. So now it is up to us to chase that and to make sure that we have an elections that gives us both the procedural democracy, but also the substantive democracy, and doesn't risk our our violence. And it is worrying because our Gen Z did not participate. So our Gen Zs must surely be thinking about something for them to have refused to register in the election. I think that we need to worry about that. The other thing for me for ICJ is the presidential system. A presidential system is raiding in nature. A presidential system does what the presidential systems are doing. They finish the legislature, and they finish the judiciary, and they finish everybody else. Because presidential systems, their own survival is so much at risk that they have to finish everybody else for their own survival, not even our own survival. So we have to really, prepare to confront these presidential systems. And I saw that also in Malawi when I came over to do the election of MPs. It's a presidential system. Very soon Parliament will be crying the way the Parliament of Kenya is crying. So it must be that other jurists are spending a lot of time. This is the presidential systems we have. I personally don't now support any changes of the constitution because the discipline we have, everything that if we try to change this constitution, all the politicians will dismantle all of it. But now we have come to a very good place, all of us. The bad guys need this constitution for their survival. The good guys need this constitution for our survival. Now that we don't need this constitution for our survival, we might as well implement it from clause 1 to 260, all of us together, and really fight for that presidential system. But otherwise, we are all at risk. But I hope not before we go to the tamale down.
Yet we learned about why the process, especially on the nomination list, has been the way it has been, was because of the wording of the requirement on the laws, right? And then we realized that a mere mention of the word youth or women or person with disabilities does not automatically establish an obligation to do this, that, and the other thing. But let me end with a personal experience and even an admission. I used to have political aspirations when I was in campus. I was a student leader at some point. But the very first job that I applied for, in preparation for that, I'd said I'd give myself a 10-year trajectory. In preparation for that, the very first job I applied for that did not require me to have a legal qualification. I went through all the interview processes. I was shortlisted. I was invited for an open door party to sign a contract. And then during that experience, or during that day, I was told, unfortunately, we won't let you sign this contract. There must have been a mistake somewhere made by the human resource person, because we don't think our systems are accessible to you. After a lot of consultations, we go to court, represented by a senior lawyer who is now a judge, and the petition was ruled in our favor, that affirmed the rights of my right to employment, but also those of persons with disabilities. Several years later, I go to open a bank account in one of the private banks here in Kenya. And then they say, because you're blind, we require you to donate power of attorney to someone else to operate the account on your behalf. After I resist, they say, then you need to sign a deed of indemnity to indemnify us from any risks that may arise from the operation of the account, citing the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, which in their view perhaps qualify a disability as a risk, right? This is an experience of a person who's black, who's a lawyer. So I have all the support system, good networks, and a good job. But there are persons with disabilities out there who have even more worrying experiences, which lead us to distrust all the systems that are existing, right? So as we work towards promoting democracy, substantive democracy, let us not only do it for the mere fact of doing it, but understand the various intersectionalities that may be leading to the distrust of the system that is existing, and realize that we have to be very, very deliberate in the measures that we take. I no longer trust the process. I'm not sure I still have the aspiration to
where do we go from here on the question of inclusion? Is strategic litigation the way to go? I think we have over-litigated the gender question. I have counted less than 13 cases on this question in the electoral process. And I don't think the law is the gap. Even where with the county assemblies we have the gender top-up formula, I can confirm both 2017, 2022, 2013, no county complied with that gender top-up formula. And it's a clear formula. So the issue is not the law, the issue is not the jurisprudence, the issue is just political culture, and that we cannot address by changing any law. I think we must just agree to be good people. The last question, the regional synergy. I think Honorable Martha already spoke to this yesterday, and it's working very well with litigation, but I think we can do it even in the human rights space. There are things that Kenya is doing well, and one of the things that I think our NHRI is doing well is documentation. So when it comes to violations during the electoral process, the Kenya Human Rights Commission always does a fantastic job in documenting violations. And I think if we support other NHRIs to do those kinds of things, we can create greater accountability using data. So I don't think that we are weak. I think we have certain things that we can capitalize on, and I think one of the things that we can capitalize on is what our NHRI is already doing, and see how we can do cross-border collaborations. If authoritarians are collaborating, why can't NHRIs and civil societies also collaborate?
I'll tell you my personal experience. In 2013, I was working for ICJ Kenya, and we were accredited to be election observers, and I voted in Nairobi, my station, where Mheshimiwa was vying to observe in Othaya. And when at the constituency level when the results were announced, I was there a couple of days later. And I had an iPad and I recorded the announcement. And then I came to Nairobi and I went to Bomas. And a couple of days of sitting in Bomas as elections were being announced, eventually Othaya was announced when I was in Bomas. And I can tell you the result was so different. I can tell you for a fact. And it was already contested in Othaya by the MPs. I think that Kingara and Shikimugandi were fighting over it. But what was announced in Bomas was not what I had on my iPad. And so, for the president. And I can tell you so, it doesn't matter how many features you put on those ballots. Let's make elections cheaper. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just make the paper a cheap paper that is verifiable. The same ones always on checks. And then let's save money and build roads.